Hi, I'm Lizzie, your inner connection coach, and I'm passionate about connection, belonging, talking about shame, and the menstrual cycle. And today I want to talk about the menstrual cycle and what happens when we are tracking our cycle. We've been tracking our cycle for a little while. We're not starting to notice patterns. We're starting to notice glimmers of different things that we need and want. And suddenly we want to put those into action. It can feel really daunting, suddenly being aware of your fluctuating needs and emotions and energy, and be tasked with this feeling of oh, okay, now I need to give myself a bit of what I need. There's an invitation to give yourself what you need, and an invitation to start to put in some boundaries in your life, boundaries with yourself first and foremost, but then equally boundaries with the people in your life and your work, etc., activities, family. And that is quite confronting, particularly in a world where, one, women and menstruators are conditioned to believe that, a good woman, a good human is a human with no needs. A good woman is a woman with no needs. And we receive messages about how being productive is the ultimate, the ideal, about rest being lazy, about not wanting to be selfish. And so suddenly menstrual cycle awareness gives us this invitation to think about ourselves differently and start to meet our needs. And so it can be quite overwhelming. And I've heard this from people when they've been working with me or working in workshops. And I completely understand, because it was my experience as well. When I first started tracking my menstrual cycle, the first thing I kind of really became aware of was, at that point, cycle day 23 was the day that I felt like everything came crumbling down. That was the day that I noticed where suddenly my energy would drop, my confidence would dive, my inner critic or my thoughts would be quite anxious-y, quite overthinking, quite a lot of thoughts, and I would just really start to struggle. And the impact of that day, kind of for the rest of the week or sometimes few weeks, it was like a spiral effect or a domino effect, and it would just seep into every aspect of my life. And so here I am tracking my cycle, trying to learn a new way of being with myself and a new way of relating with myself. And I just kind of remember thinking, well, maybe I could just try on this one day to start to practice giving myself what I need. And I remember making a deal with myself, because the funny thing was, two things. Boundaries, every year I'd pick a word, right? A word that I really wanted to cultivate or bring into my life. The word boundaries had been my word for 2 years running. And I was how do I do this? How do I have boundaries? How do I bring boundaries into my life? And I thought that I really believe saying no to people, I thought it would be the end of the world. And I guess the flip side of that is, if I'm saying no to people, I'm probably saying yes to a part of myself, a need of my own. I didn't kind of know that, but I thought saying no to people, my partner, work, friends, it would destroy any relationship and destroy me and destroy them. I really struggled with it. And I just gave myself this deal, come on, Lizzie, you can practice on this one day. So I started to practice that. I remember talking to my partner and saying to them, hey, this is what I'm going to do. I really struggle to kind of articulate my needs and to say no. So on this one day, I want to let you know, this is what I think I need on that one day. And I'd recognize I needed to slow down. I needed to rest. I really needed to hone in on my self-care on that one day, because of the way it would spiral. I knew that that's when my inner critic was loudest. My self-esteem would just drop. And so I kind of needed to take away as much pressure as I could and take away as much external noise. So I kind of said to her, I said to Beth, on day 23, if it's a work day, when I finish work, I just want to be able to have a clear evening in the space to do what I feel like. Probably that's going to be a bath, a book in bed and then dinner in bed and an early night. It might be like a light walk if I fancy it, but I really don't want it to be a night where we're making any plans, and I don't want you to have any expectations of me on that evening. And because I find it really hard to say no, can you not put me in a position where I'm going to be having to say to you no to begin with? And some people might disagree with doing that, but that's what I did. I kind of spoke to my work and said, I'm going to be working home on these days. I have a pretty regular cycle, so I was able to track when that was going to be for me. And so kind of roughly organizing my diary so that I know I could work from home on cycle day 23. At that time, I ran a small team, and I kind of let my team know, hey, on that day, or usually the day before or that week, like, when I'm working from home this week, unless it's super urgent, can it wait? Can it be an email? Can it wait? So just communicating with them. And I stopped having like really non-urgent things in my call in my diary that day, where they're clients that I could speak to either before or 2 or 3 days afterwards. Like I just cleared as much out of that one day. Still did my job, but like what was not urgent. And if there were clients that I found really demanding, we had a few clients that I found really difficult, I just wasn't going to speak to them on that day. And then what else was it that I needed? Like really yummy food, and just permission. I think for me, there's like big permission to rest. So I just started practicing with that. Even again, like for me, coming home from work, not doing anything, hopping into bed was radical. Like just so radical, because I was entrenched in like being productive equals like worthiness. And whilst I love to move my body, I was definitely that person who also sought validation through movement. And so there was just this real change for me, and it was really confronting. And that's also why it was really helpful to keep it on that one day, because a lot was coming up for me. It stirred my shame pot. It stirred the pot that kind of said you're not worthy. And it made me, it kind of like revealed some of the belief patterns I had about myself and about like behaviors, giving yourself what you needed, saying no, rest, etc. So this one day gave me not only the kind of safe container to experiment, saying no, giving myself what I needed, listening to my yeses, etc., advocating for myself with with the safe people around me. It also like gave me this like safe container of revealing some of the kind of uncomfortable, tougher stuff. So this is my invitation to you. If you're early into tracking your cycle and you're noticing the different needs, you're starting to notice those subtle like yeses in your body and your no's, and you're kind of wanting to start to give yourself or experiment giving yourself what you need, or you're noticing that like my body really is calling for rest, but it feels frightening. And I think something I hear from a lot of people is, if I give myself some rest, I'll never get back up again. And even though we feel that way, that's not going to happen. Just this invitation to just practice with one day. And so you might have a specific day that you know that you struggle with, like I did at the beginning, and let it be that day. Otherwise, like pick other days, and then equally, I shared like if it was a weekday, what it would be like. If it was a weekend, I really gave my permission to like, hey, stay at home. Have a duvet day, be in bed, and what would be nourishing foods, etc. If you don't have a cycle, you could pick, work with the moon cycle, and you could pick a certain day of the moon cycle to practice this with. A lot of people like to do that around the new moon because it's similar to the winter, to our inner winter, our period, a menstruation phase. But equally, you could just pick, one day a month where you're going to practice. So you're going to practice giving yourself what you need. And like give yourself the tenderness and the care, share it with friends and family. If there is vulnerability around that, let them know. And so that you can really take care of yourself. And then in time, you're going to build that muscle. That there was then what came from it is like, wow, it feels really wonderful and beautiful to give myself what I need. like how nourishing, and it opened this little window for a different type of intimacy with myself that I just did not know was possible. It built my muscle to be able to say to people, no, actually, I can't do that. You know, I'm doing something different. Or, yeah, just lean into those no's and those yeses. I just practice, you know, because even though I'd said to Beth and the people around me, hey, this is what I'm going to do, not everyone's tracking my cycle. So sometimes it would come up like, hey, can we do this on that day? And I was practicing, being like, no, sorry, that's my day that I look after myself. I can't do that. I started to look forward to this day each month, and again it started to build that muscle of like how I can give myself what I need. It then started to spill into the other parts of my cycle, you know, and it taught me about rest, and I think probably one of the first things it gave me that really pushed me to keep doing this work was that my experience of day 23 started to change. And also because I wasn't pushing myself, so prior to tracking my cycle and not knowing that day 23 was this day that everything would come tumbling down, I would just push myself. You know, I would feel rough. My confidence would dive. My energy would drop, and I would just be blaming myself for all of that and being like, "What's wrong with you? Like, you know, why don't you feel good? Why you need to try harder?" And I would be disappointed in myself because I was, you know, everyone knows I'm psychology background. I've had a lot of therapy. I'm all about like showing up for yourself and supporting yourself, and I have such a deep commitment to myself. And at that point, you know, I hadn't really built that compassion muscle, and without this knowledge of my menstrual cycle, when I would have these changes, I would think it was my fault, like I wasn't strong enough. And so with the awareness around my menstrual cycle, and then suddenly being able to like care for myself on day 23, things weren't spiraling, and I was kind of containing that day kind of to that day, or maybe that day and 1 or 2 days after, versus the spiraling and the shame and the self-hatred and the self-loathing spilling out into my relationships, into my work, killing my self-esteem, that then would sometimes take me, you know, a week, 10 days, 2 weeks to recover, and then we'd nearly be back around to the next like day 23. And so that was really wonderful. So I hope you found that helpful. You know, let me know how you get on. Let me know in the show notes if you want to share anything, and if you have an experience or you have a tip around this. And yeah, I'll see you next time. Bye.